G'day. I'm Stephen Travers. Goodness, a very croaky Steve Travers this morning. It is early. Well, it's 7 a.m. here in Sydney, Australia, and yeah, there's not even as much daylight coming through the windows at the moment. But look, I'm looking forward to this session. Um, Gosh, it could just take me a little while to get my. There's no one else awake at home at the moment, so I haven't had a chance to be talking to anyone and just get my vocal cords moving again for the day. So hopefully that will pick up. But look, I've been drawing now probably almost daily for what, 3 years now, making videos mostly, and I've been particularly, g'day there, guys. I've been particularly reflecting on how my drawing has changed. Just looking at the actual drawings, things I'm doing now, compared with things I was doing, you know, years ago. And as I've looked to see how they've changed, I've also reflected on how my g'day. I've also reflected on how my understanding of what the drawing process is has changed. And I've got to say, I've got to thank YouTube for that, because I'm sure I would never have put into words in my head um, um, actually working out what am I doing when I draw. I would have just drawn, and I think intuitively I would have made some of the discoveries, or at least perhaps even all of the discoveries to some degree, in what g'day in in my drawing process. But because I've had to put things into words and I've had to organize them into bullet points and all of these things, um, in order to speak to camera about them, it's really forced me to have clarity, and also just going over them and repeating them in different videos. It's really sunk in exactly what my understanding of drawing is. And that's let me then change that understanding of drawing, or develop it, or add to it in a way that I don't think would have happened if I hadn't been having to actually put things into words. And even if I'd bought a book and read a book and read someone um, outlining as an approach to drawing, a way of understanding drawing, what I've worked out myself, I certainly wouldn't have worked it out and understood it as fully, as deeply. We all know from when we're studying, we can read things in books that we're trying to understand, and they can kind of just, even when we think we get it, that doesn't necessarily mean we've engaged with it enough to have it, well, for an exam, be something we remember to incorporate into an essay. Um, and with our drawing, we can read drawing books and we can look at drawing examples, but it doesn't necessarily go in deep enough to start to change how we draw. And so, yeah, thank you, YouTube, and thank you, people who've watched my videos. Thank you. Is Now I've lost my track because I had a look at the chat. So, but anyway, but what I began to realize as I looked at a range of drawings over the last 3 years, and partly easier to do this because, as you know, I tend to draw the same subjects as I think probably most people who draw do. We have things that we enjoy as subjects in life, and so they attract us in our drawing. And I began to realize that there have been, in my understanding of drawing, 5 major shifts. Well, not shifts, but developments, where I've come to realize that something further is really important. That there's a focus I haven't had in my drawing, which will be helpful. And it's not that I had no concept of that, or there weren't elements of those further points in my first drawing, at least partially. But I suppose I hadn't realized the implications, the potential, the possibilities of each of those 5 areas of drawing. So, I mean, the first one, just to give an idea of what I'm talking about, is simply accuracy. It's, if I want my drawings to look realistic, and I'm assuming that if you engage with my channel, that you want at least a certain amount of realism in what you draw. if I want my drawings to look realistic, they have to look accurate. And particularly because I draw architecture so much, it's having perspective correct. Because a building is something constructed, it's not like a face. If we look at a face and the proportions are inaccurate, well, it's pretty obvious. In fact, they don't have to be out by very much at all. We have a very narrow tolerance of variation in the features and feel that it still looks real. But with architecture, we can build buildings to any proportion. And so it's not quite as obvious in terms of height to width proportions and things. But if we get the perspective angles wrong, then we know that we've somehow not captured realism when we look at the drawing, even if we're not sure why, because we haven't quite seen perspective in life, perhaps with enough observation to understand why it doesn't look right. But we can tell it doesn't look right. G'day. We can tell it doesn't look right, and so that's um, so therefore capturing accuracy when we draw, and so when we capture accuracy when we draw, we start to get drawings that look like this, that look accurate in some ways. They look accurate in their proportions and their form and their perspective. Although, goodness, this slopes in, doesn't it, rather than straight down. But anyway, you can see what I was aiming at. And yeah, so and maybe you'd be really pleased if you did that, particularly if accuracy is an issue. So um, and I did, and I've got just a few drawings here that I grabbed before I started. Maybe I should have grabbed some more, but I'm not sure how effective holding them up. But here's a drawing of a house that I'm pretty sure this is my first house that I drew as an Instagram as a YouTube demo. Normally at this point, I wasn't really drawing suburban houses. I was still drawing grand architecture, or at least larger, like apartment type blocks that were a couple of 100 years old at least. So, thank you. Um, so if you look at this, yes, it's accurate. The perspective's accurate. I probably partly drew it because it's an interesting perspective. The photo was taken from across the street, upper story of a house. So eye level is very high in this. Eye level is going to be somewhere here, going through these upper windows, and that makes sense because it's lining up with being in an upper story across the road. So yeah, accuracy, getting things right. We And so if we're looking at developing a drawing style that's not accurate is not going to be recognizable as a particularly mature drawing style. And because when we're beginners, often we're not so accurate with proportions, or placement. So if we draw portraits, maybe the eyes, maybe we've managed to get the eyes um, lined up in a horizontal line, but perhaps the eyeballs don't track quite exactly enough. It's not that sometimes we see people, or we might be a person where our eyes aren't exactly lined up, but we notice that that's not the way it normally works. And for most of the time, that's not an impact we want to have in the person that we've just drawn. Um, Yeah, and so, if I can't consistently, and I suppose we're talking about consistency in all of these 5 points. If I haven't got consistency in the accuracy of what I'm capturing, then it's it's not going to come across as realistic. And yeah, I understand people make stylistic choices to deliberately distort the real life forms and proportions of what they draw. And that's great. That's deliberate. That's all about control and choice. And that is a maturity in our drawing process. If I can deliberately choose to distort my drawing in a consistent way to create a certain effect, um, then that is a sign of my thinking and understanding of the drawing process. If you just missed that start, what I've come to understand, firstly, is that all of the changes in my drawing, at least the significant changes where I'm deliberately changing things, and that starts to have a far bigger and more consistent and controlled impact than the tiny changes that happen from drawing to drawing in a vague way without clear understanding. G'day, Connie. Um, yeah, the key thing to this is that my thinking, my understanding of the process developed and changed, and I think became more mature. It became more complex in some ways, but um, but in essence, it stayed the same. It's just that I got a deeper understanding. See, and I talk about in drawing when we start to draw, not to try and tackle too many things at once, but to go deep in one area. So to go deep, say, in drawing with pencil or drawing with pen or using watercolor, not to try and do everything at once, to go deep in the subject matter that we draw. So not to draw a tiger one day, a baby the next day, a house the next day, a landscape the next day, vase of flowers the next day, but to choose subjects that we can repeat, subjects that we like, but that we can repeat over and over again, so that we don't have everything to think about from scratch every time. So if we say draw close up of flowers, okay, we it's not that every flower isn't different, but we start to learn the issues of observation with a flower. When we draw a flower, we so when I draw a flower, I look at the petals first to get the overall shape of the flower, because I've learned that's the best place to start. And then I particularly pay attention to how the petals attach. Some petals sort of come out like this and flop down. Some come out like this and go up. Many petals come out slightly, drop down, and then come out. So it gives them a little more separation between and I mean, every flower is different. I look if there's a ball of stamens, whether they're shaggy or flat, I look at that shape, and then I look at that shape in the perspective of the flower, because flowers, like houses, are very affected by the position we view them from. And so perspective is really important if I want realistic flowers. Now, because I've drawn a number of flowers now for how to draw flower videos, I've learned which things to that I need to observe. I've gone deeper, if you like, in drawing flowers than kittens, and I've never drawn a kitten, I don't think. So, and no problem in drawing kittens if that's what you want to draw. I just prefer to draw flowers, I guess, than kittens. But if I had to draw a kitten, I would have none of this sort of having worked out. What am I drawing? What do I need to look at? I'd be looking at it, working out what I think is the best place to start. Chances are by the end of the drawing, I'd be thinking, especially drawing with ink and I can't erase things, I'd be thinking, gosh, I kind of should have started here, and I drew that line too quickly. I didn't realize that I didn't know enough to get it positioned greatly. G'day, Switzerland. Yeah, I didn't know enough. And so when we go deep in being consistent in the subject we draw, we position ourselves to learn more about how to observe that thing. And what happens then is when I do go to draw kittens or battleships or something I've never drawn before, I've actually learned how to go deep. I've learned the sorts of things we need to look for, because I've had a experience now of really searching, um, concentrated way for those things, and discovering when I draw which things have been not just helpful but essential for the drawing I want to produce. And so that um, so when I start with the kitten, sure, I haven't drawn a kitten before, but now I've got a framework and understanding of observation that I developed in going deep with one subject consistently. And now I can apply. This isn't even one of the points I'm talking about. Um, but but observation actually, I probably could have had six. I probably could have made learning to observe, but um, but I think my observation was probably always pretty good. But but we go deep with the flower, say. Then I come to the kitten. I now know the sorts of things to look for, the sorts of things that could be helpful. And I've learned to be hesitant before the ink hits the paper. And so I've learned things by staying in the one kind of subject area. So um, yeah, so I'm not talking about those things today. Um, I've got 10 likes here actually. Thanks, German. So maybe they're not showing up on your screen, but according to my screen, and now I've got 11. Thank you. And if you're listening and you haven't hit the like button, please do. It helps me out. I did get out of bed early this morning. But I mean, gosh, 20 past 7. I spent 30 years where I was at work at 20 past 7. Good grief. And now I feel like I'm up at the crack of dawn. I just shut all the doors so I don't wake my wife up because she didn't need to be up. Oh, and there's the morning magpies. Okay, so what did develop and change for me over the 3 years I've been drawing for YouTube, as I said at the start, was my understanding of what the drawing process was. And so because I had to clarify my understanding into words, I would normally have, I think, just been fairly intuitive and applying things. And but that's great to hear, Jaline, Jaylin. Well, it's great to hear anyway. Yeah, I would normally, it would have been a vaguer thing, my improvement, but instead having to put things into words for videos that forced me to clarify what I was thinking. And I'm the first person to bet any teaching I've got that's useful. I'm the first person to benefit from it. And it comes from, it's a funny experience for me because obviously what I'm teaching, the points, my understanding, comes from my drawing experience. And yet I've discovered, and this is what surprised me, it also leads and directs my drawing experience. Because once I've become aware that, oh, I'm doing it this way and this works, and this is why I'm doing it this way, and this is what I'm thinking, and this is what I was hoping, or I've learned to do it this way because that didn't work. Now I have a clearer direction for the next drawing. And often I'll do a drawing and feel like I've discovered something. And then I'll deliberately choose a subject that's pretty similar because I'm really keen to put into practice again something that I felt increased something about my drawing, the realism, or I don't know, just the interest, whatever, the accuracy. So, but the first thing then that I already started with, as I mentioned before, was accuracy in the architecture, because I basically drew architecture when I started, architecture with the odd tree next to it or in front of it or behind it, but the architecture being the main event. I was very focused on accuracy, and particularly perspective accuracy. So I said, if my proportions of height to width weren't quite the same, if you didn't know the building, then you probably weren't even going to notice that. But if my proportions were out, you would. So that was the first thing. So if you want to develop a more mature drawing style, then I think learning to capture accurately the subject that you're drawing is vital. Like that is a focus. It's hard to have something that looks realistic if it's obviously way too wide or too tall, or it leans in a way, or it just doesn't look like that shape would look from that angle. So all of that. So now the second kind of focus that I had, that I began to work on, and it's interesting, I didn't have the language of creating the effect in our drawing, and I didn't have the understanding of sort of the visual effect and blah blah blah. I was still, but I was aware that when I had a photo, which is what I mostly drew from, that the photo made things look really flat, and I had to put a sense of depth back into that. And I became aware of that. So I was just looking at painting. I became aware of that because I painted for 10 years before I drew, and what I painted was was tree canopies. It was that sort of thing. And well, it was that thing, but that sort of thing. And with photos, if you take a photo of a tree or a bushland scene where you've got lots of vegetation, trees behind each other very close, when you look at the photo, it in life it can be wonderfully deep and complex and three-dimensional, but when you look at the photo, everything's been pulled close together, and it's very hard. You can see this outline, silhouette shape, and all foliage, but it's very hard to tell what's closer, what's further away, um, because the detail in life, we'd sort of see the closer things in more detail, but in life, in the photo, everything's the same detail in terms of the leaves, and so it makes the further ones look as close as the closest ones. So in my painting, I learned that I had to really study the photo or remember it from life and work out what parts are closer, what parts are further away. And now in my painting technique, I have to manipulate the paint, the colors, the values, the edges, the detail to create the sense of three dimensions now on the canvas. Um, um, so the tree looks real, or as real as I can make it look. And and again, I talk about going deep. I went deep in that in oil painting because I limited my subjects to it mostly at the start to tree canopies, where depth from a photo is a real problem, or a real challenge, I suppose. Um, and again, I learned there, I can't just copy the photo, because then I get something that doesn't look real. It doesn't look three-dimensional. It doesn't feel like a tree with some branches coming straight at me and some going away, and the top of the tree is actually further away, often a long way further away from the branches that come out towards me, particularly if it had very deep canopy. So all of these things, I learnt those in painting. And then when I began to draw, because I just only did oil paint for 10 years, pretty much, that meant that, please hit the like button too if this is interesting. I found when I began to draw that so much of what I learnt when I was painting was just informing my drawing process, sometimes consciously, often it just happened. And then I realized, oh yeah, I learned that when I was doing the oil painting. And now it tells me I'm using a pen, but I can approximate that in this way. And all of that, my drawing the effective detail, kind of came from that, because in a tree, you paint the detail of the leaves. With a paintbrush, you can't outline leaves. So you're not even tempted to go down that path. You have to take the canopy as a whole. And so when I began to draw with a pen, I was thinking that's what I have to do. And so, yeah. So accuracy of shape was the first emphasis, but depth of plane was the second one. And it's a very common problem when I look at drawings of beginners, or people who've been drawing even for a while but don't feel like they've progressed very far in their drawing, is that there is no strong sense of depth of plane. And again, my most successful video, almost 2 million views, drawing the effective detail. The first video I did on that, was from a field of flowers. I was actually, my focus in that video was when you have a lot of detail and you can't draw it all. How do you kind of do that? Well, you draw the feel, the effect. You create the effect. You don't draw the effect so much as you create the effect by what you do draw. And so you have a smaller part in a focal point, often usually one of the closer points, where you do draw the detail. But as you move away from the focal point, you create ways of mark making that change that lessen the detail, but the brain of the person looking at it is seeing the detail and extrapolating it, just working out what is not drawn so clearly. And that works in our drawing, because that's how it works in life. When I look at something, I only ever have one focal point. By definition, it's the point that lines up in front of my eyeballs. Now, I can shift my eyeballs very slightly and see something different, but the focal point has shifted. And what was very clear has now become blurry. as long as I'm looking at a different focal point. But if I look back to look at the blurry bit, well, now it's clear because my focal point has shifted back. So we have this sort of flickering back and forth. A camera doesn't do. A camera takes in all the detail all at once and locks it into place. And now when I look at the photo, when I draw and I roam my eyes around the photo, there is no focal point. Um, well, there is a focal point, but what I see doesn't change because the camera locked in all the detail of that moment under those conditions. Yeah, and it's done it in a way that takes away the sense of depth. So I would now say that putting depth into my scene is actually a way is actually one element of drawing the effect, drawing the capturing the visual effect. And instead of just using the phrase visual effect for overwhelming detail, I would say in everything we draw, if we're aiming for realism, we're aiming to draw the visual effect, because even in life, what I see is not the object. It's my my eyes and physiology perceiving the object. But that's much closer to the reality of the object than when I try and capture it with this on a piece of paper. Um, but depth of plane, the fact that when it's most obvious when I look on a lookout and I've got things close to me. Maybe I have a railing in front of me to stop me falling into the canyon, and then 10 kilometers away, I have an escarpment wall or something. Um, yeah, and maybe that eventually winds all the way back to where I am, um, and and the way it looks 10 kilometers away is very different to the way it looks as it comes up and joins at my feet, where my little rail is. So visually, it looks different when it's far away, even though it's the same thing. And that's a visual effect. It's an effect that of looking different in the distance that happens in life. Now, if I want my drawings to look realistic, I need to try and capture that depth. And we talk about depth of plane or depths of plane. In that, if I look at a scene, I've got some things that are close, there's things that are further away. So if I'm looking at a streetscape, if I'm on one side of the road and I'm looking across to the other side of the road, I might have the pole of a parking sign that's on my side of the road. There might be a garbage bin at the base of it that now that's a lot closer than what's on the road. There might be a car parked on the road, and there might be a car going up and down on the road, and there might be a car on the other side of the road. And all of those are sort of really separate depths of plane. Or I might say, well, look, the footpath on my side is one depth of plane, the road is another depth of plane, and then what's on the far side of the road, if it's parallel to me, that's another depth of plane. And I can't really see past the fronts of the buildings on the other side of the road. And so, you know, so in life, that means that the closest things I see more clearly, and the furthest things I don't see as clearly. So how do I capture that? And almost from the start, as well as accuracy, I was thinking about depths of plane. I think because that had been so important in my painting, and I did have experience with that. So, so how can I find marks and lines? And so I, worked out a way of creating this. Um, and by using different pens, using wider pens for closer things, and then finer pens for going right back. Not too many, but maybe two or three, or at most four different grades of pen, depending how close the closest things were. If I had some things really close, then I might use a 0.5, and then I might use a 0.3 for the bulk of it, and then a 0.2 and a 0.1 for some further bits. When I do a bushland scene, or a landscape, so the furthest things are often very far away, even kilometers and kilometers away, I might use a 0.1 or a 0.05 for the very furthest parts, a very light touch. So, but I had an understanding of what I was doing. I kind of worked out a technique of how to try and capture that. And so I had great clarity every time I drew. Well, in fact, every time I started to observe my reference before I drew, I had a framework of understanding. And if you missed the start, you missed me talking about this, but I had a framework of understanding of what am I trying to do when I draw that guided me. And so I think not from my very first drawings, but close to my first drawings, you can start to see this development of depth of plane. And it was actually one of the subjects of a number of my earliest videos because it was um, a drawing method, a drawing process that I was aware of and could put into words uh, right from the word go. The remaining three that we'll get onto now, the remaining three didn't become clear in my thinking, in my understanding as part of my process as readily, as easily. And I began to play around with them. Intuitively is the wrong word, but maybe by mistake, as not by mistake, but in a random way. And then I sort of thought, oh, that works. You know, that experimenting works. That looks kind of real. I'm happy with that. Can I push that further in the next drawing? And then I would begin to work out what is it that I'm doing that works. And sometimes it was the way I was thinking. Yeah, I guess trial and error. Yeah. Sometimes it was the way I was thinking. And sometimes it was just more random, a bit more luck and experimenting, I suppose. Yeah, a trial and error. But the next focus that really changed things for me was I began to focus on form rather than shape. So when we focus on shape, when I look at my reference or in life, it doesn't matter. It's easier with a reference because a reference is already two-dimensional and I have to make my drawing on a two-dimensional surface. So if you like, that translation from 3D to 2D has already been done by the camera. And that's why it's easy to draw from a photo, because you know that significant thing has already been done by the camera. Whereas in life, I could be looking down a street that literally stretches for a kilometer, and I have to translate that onto a two-dimensional sheet of paper from something with a depth of plane of a kilometer. So when we look at shape, I'm focusing on this shape, like a tessellation, and then this shape, and then this shape, and putting them together and hoping they line up and match up. When I focus on form, my focus is this is a plane moving away from me, as in not aeroplane, but as a geometric plane, as a wall moving away from me. And because it's moving away from me, certain things are happening. So I'm becoming more aware of the impact of three-dimensionality on the form first. And now I'm looking at that and I'm starting to see the detail, but I'm also starting to see, although less successfully in a camera, in a photo, I'm starting to see the impact of how it looks, this shape, because a shape is just a shape. And I can cut out that shape and look at it, and every part of it is just as close to me. But if I'm thinking of the form, of the three-dimensional element of it in relation to me, you know, then, because, yeah, as it moves away, I'm starting to now focus on the elements of how the movement in space away from me looks. And the impact it has visually. And now the photo may capture that, and sometimes it will, or it may downplay it, but indicate it, or it may not really show it at all. And I need to put it back into my drawing to make my drawing look more realistic. I can look at a photo and I know it's a photo. We don't often mistake a photo for life. Occasionally we might, if the photo is being manipulated in a way to really bring out the effect of reality in the photo. But generally, a photo does not fool us that it's reality. We know it's a photo. So because it doesn't capture all the visual qualities of reality. So we're always trying to put those in. So yeah, so form, so 3 dimensions, and I think the fourth point kind of links back to that. The fourth development in my thinking, and this now is much more recent in terms of a major impact in my work. But that's hatching. That's the potential, the possibilities of hatching and cross hatching. Now, obviously, I was hatching in my earliest drawings, and when I was drawing with pencil, and I first had trees to draw, and I was hatching to create the value in the shadowed and shaded areas, and but as is the case with many people, my thought then was that, well, hatching is a way that you put shade and shadow on things. And the only question is, what's the right way to put the lines on? What's the right angle to do it? As if there's a right way to do it. And I suppose this is the problem when we learn techniques in isolation from context. And the problem with a lot of videos, whether they're perspective videos that are just little boxes on flat planes, or whether they're cross-hatching videos that are little cubes, maybe a sphere, a cone, a cylinder, and okay, this is it. This is what hatching is. Look how you do it for each of these shapes. But when we go to life, somehow that doesn't seem, in most cases, obvious how it looks. Or when we go to apply it, because we think it applies with the shape that we have in our drawing, we get it somehow doesn't work, or it causes problems, or it doesn't look good. But we feel that that's the right way because we've learned a technique. We haven't come to understand drawing. We haven't come to understand a drawing process where this technique is a tool. And the video hasn't told us that. We've watched the video, hasn't told us. Now, this is a very simplified thing. And of course, in life, it can be a lot more complex. And these are the principles to use to work out how to apply this simple technique in a range of complex situations. The other thing I realized that the videos don't tell us about hatching is that hatching is way more useful than just capturing shade or shadow. It's not just the way you do shadows when you draw with ink. And I mean, if you've got pencil, then you can, lay a grayscale on using the side of the pencil. But it doesn't work that way. And I began to, and for me, let me just see if I can grab a drawing here. I've reorganized all my drawings to make it more obvious for me. But the thing I think for me personally was breakthrough in my drawing, in my hatching, was the fact that I love the Australian bushland scenes. And this is probably the earliest one that I was happy with. It is still a bit of a tangle, but you can see that my hatching there, a lot of hatching, and some of it is for shade and shadow, but primarily I'm creating values, areas of darkness that contrast with the line work, and I've drawn them in a way that I hope, and also with detail, that I hope gives a sense of some things being closer than others and some things very far away. And there's a line across the middle of very lightly hatched lines where I'm trying to do the other side of the gorge that's between me and the horizon there. So, but so that was kind of the start of that. And then I began to draw more bushland scenes. And here's another. This one is a bit further on, and I'm becoming a bit bolder with my line work. But when you look at this again, this is mostly hatching. And I guess that with the steps, there are some geometrical shapes, but a lot of it is sort of a tangle. And so to create the tangle, because visually the tangle is so much a part of the Australian bush, the tangle is all around you, and yet and yet to create some distinctions so that we're not overwhelmed with tangle and can't see anything but lines, which then start to flatten things. Still need to have a tangle, but a sense of depth in the tangle. And so I began to explore hatching as a means for that. And now it's not just shade and shadow, but I'm trying to actually draw what I'm drawing with hatching. And yeah, there are outlines for some things, for tree branches in particular. But so much of this, I mean, if this is what you think of drawing fundamentally, then when you go to the Australian bush, um, where does that leave you? Because there aren't many shapes you can outline. And if you outline all the trees, all the tree branches and trunks, um, and do nothing else, well, there's mostly blank paper. And so drawing that subject forced me to, and it's not just the Australian bush. I did a couple then of European forests. This is a French forest. And this is where I began to realize that, see, yes, we do use hatching for shade and shadow. Okay, we do. And so my earliest drawings of buildings, particularly colonnades and things, would have shadow behind the columns, and it's a great way to make the columns stand out as well. So it adds interest to what we're doing. But now this forest in France isn't a dense tangle. It's much more open than our forest. But what was visually very apparent in it was the light coming through from the background, very strong light. The leaves were thinner than our gum leaves, and because they're not permanent leaves, and the light came through them more. There was a wonderful transparency of light. So this was all about not actually trying to draw shade and shadows, but to capture the light, the effect of light, which of course you can't draw, but it's the white paper that gives the effect of light, and then the lighter gray scales. But learning to control my mark making, and that's, I mean, this isn't one of the points because this actually flows through all of them. But at some point in my mind, see, when we're thinking of accuracy, I'm sort of rewriting this in my head as I go. But when we think about drawing outline as the way we draw, rather than mark making, and lines are one of the marks I can make. When we think about putting marks on the paper as our primary grid framework, then now we can draw things by splashing marks around, and we can draw things that we can't outline, that you couldn't outline. What again, you've probably seen this. What again, this was all about the light. In life, this is such a boring little track. As you walk past it, it comes down onto the roadway, onto the footpath on one of the bends near where I live. You wouldn't look twice at it, but it looks quite enchanting, because I've emphasized the light effect. I've simplified things a little bit. And but again, look how I've drawn it. Like, that's all hatching. And yes, there is shade and shadow in that, but that's not been my focus when I've put the marks on the paper. My focus has been creating the light effects. I've actually, in my mind, in my processing of what am I doing, I'm not thinking I'm drawing the darkness. I'm actually thinking I'm creating the effect of the lightness of the light. And it makes all the difference how we think. And this is why I keep having all these videos where I talk about process and understanding, because that's key to our drawing. Everybody just says, "Oh, just tell me the technique." Well, then you'll do drawings at best like this, because you'll have some skills and you'll have some tools, but you'll never know when to use them, how to use them, because it's understanding the process of drawing that tells you what tool to get in the toolbox. And then, again, with hatching, hatching works with people as well. And again, there's I haven't started with an outline of the figures. Now, there are some lines there. Lines are wonderful marks that we can make. And, at some point, if it's a short line, it's a mark. And if it gets longer, it becomes a line. If it gets really short, it becomes a dot. And if it gets any shorter, it becomes just a white space. But we use all of these things when we draw, and it's all about creating effect. I came to realize that everything was creating effect. That even the things close up, I can't copy them if we're talking about copying a photo, even if it's a simple object. I'm always trying to create the effect. And once I realized that, it wasn't just when you did trees and foliage, but it was everything. That really opened up my mind to be thinking, wow, I can draw everything differently. And let me show you. I showed you earlier. This was I think the first house I drew. Let me show you, and I'll compare it with the last house I've drawn, which was yesterday. If you haven't seen this video, why not after this go and have a look at it. But this is the house I drew yesterday, and this is the house I drew, and maybe 3 years ago. Um, Now, I'm. You may be saying, "Well, I'd be very happy to have drawn the top house," and I was happy at the time. And in lots of ways, it's a nice little drawing still. It's a great composition, great angle. But when I look at the bottom one, I mean, look at the heavy, even lines that I've used, and my focus was placing those lines accurately, so that the perspective was correct and the proportions were the same. Now, I'm still concentrating on that when I do this house, but I'm making my lines much lighter. I've really spent 3 years learning how to hold the pen more lightly on the paper, and and I often, even when I do have a line, I build up that line over and over again with a number of very, very light lines that I then layer on each other, and I do it fairly quickly, that I layer on each other, and that what I only actually realized this maybe in the last week. I mean, I've been doing it and I've been very happy with the result, but what I've come to realize has actually given me the fifth point. It's actually given me the fifth focus. But just before I tell you that, just to finish off with the hatching, what I've come to learn, and this is my second last building I've done. And again, if you look at where hatching is there and how it's used and how it brings things to life and how it creates a more realistic effect than if I outlined those trees, um, lets me get a much more three-dimensional. But I've also got hatching on the side of the car to capture the effect of the light there as well. Um, I've used a couple of different pens to help with the depth of plane. Oh, actually, this drawing, you may not have seen it. This was actually a live drawing demo. So I did this one 2 mornings ago. It took about the video is about 2 hours, but the actual drawing I think is about 45 minutes. So you'll see on the thumbnail, you'll see the reference photo of this because obviously I hadn't drawn it when I had to post the thumbnail, so I couldn't put the drawing on the thumbnail. But if you want to at least just look at the drawing part, it's in real time. I'm jabbering away as I do it, explaining what I'm doing here or there, or what I'm thinking, what I'm trying to decide to do, which is just as important as what I actually do. And um, but yeah, but so I came to I began to draw with lighter lines because I'm thinking more of creating effect. And I realized that what was happening was I was creating softer edges. Now, I'm not saying, and that's what I you don't get when your focus is on a straight line that's accurately placed. In fact, you're more likely with that focus to be drawing slightly slower because your focus is on accuracy above all else. When you're doing light lines now, and these are fairly short lines as well, so that makes it easier. But and you're moving quickly, you can get a very light line. And part of what happens is that because the pen's in contact with the paper for less time, there's less ink flowing onto the paper, and the edges are softer. The edges, at the very edge, the ink is really just touching the top ridges of the paper. So it partly depends on the paper you use. If you use very, very smooth, glossy copy paper, this isn't going to happen. But if you use paper with a little bit of tooth, as I do, I think it's 290 GSM cartridge paper. Let me just check that. It's written on the, no, it's 210. 210 GSM drawing cartridge. Look, if you're interested, people often ask me what I use, what paper I use. It's an Australian brand. It's actually a German paper that's imported into Australia, and they make it into these sketch pads. So 210, take a screenshot if you want to try and chase the paper I use and see if it's available in your country. Yeah, g'day, me too. Welcome. So, yeah, so that's that. So the area that I'm kind of working on in my head now, the latest focus that I've got is edges. It's been way more aware of edges in what I draw, and again, this has been happening partly because of the subjects I've been drawing. So the edges of the Australian bush, you've really got to stop seeing shapes and start to see effect if you're going to be able to draw. Just before we move on from hatching, as I said, hatching was something that I did use at the start because we do, and particularly with buildings, you want some nice shaded areas to make buildings look three-dimensional. And when you watch the how to hatch videos, because they're often hatching on the sides of little boxes and things, that can appear to translate reasonably well and easily to buildings, except because of all the detail on buildings, a cube is just a cube, it's just a flat surface. But when you have things coming out and going in, suddenly it's not so simple. And that little video hasn't equipped you. It left you thinking you understood hatching, but you can't apply it to real life, which is more complex. And, even more so when real life looks like this. So I began to realize that there are different ways of hatching, and that we can use hatching with a different purpose. And I have a video that's in the last 2 months of 10 different ways I use hatching. So hatching is a tool, and it is a tool that I can use for shade or for shadow. But I've got 9 other ways that I've identified that I think of and I use hatching when I draw. So if you struggle with hatching, maybe that's a video you need to watch, because when we understand the potential of hatching as being beyond shade and shadow, suddenly we start to have more understanding of the ways we can use it. So one of the ways, probably the next most important one, is I can use hatching as a way of showing, revealing, or emphasizing the three-dimensional form of an object. So I've drawn the shape, which gives me an outline I sort of could cut out, and it's just a flat piece of paper cut out. But by hatching in certain ways, I can emphasize the roundedness or the evenness of the curves or the unevenness of the curves. I can emphasize imperfections. And I can also create the effect of distance if it's a large shape, that this part of it is actually closer to me than that part. So hatching is way more useful than shade and shadow. And as we come to understand that, the possibilities for it are more and more. And of course, they're more sophisticated possibilities. If you watch a cartoon, in most cartoons, they will draw the shadow on the ground. The cartoon shadow that kind of runs behind the cartoon character. Um, and so using hatching just for that is not a very advanced perception of it or way of using it. Um, but when we start to see the further ways we can use it and the further effects we can create, see all of these things I'm talking about, all of these areas, accuracy of shape, depth of plane, perceiving three dimensions ahead of the two-dimensional shapes, hatching and how we perceive and capture the effect of the edges, all go to creating a more mature style of drawing. They all lead to our understanding in each of those areas can become more sophisticated. And as our understanding becomes more sophisticated or more developed, or whichever word is less intimidating to you, as that happens, it will start to flow through into our drawings. And they will start to, yeah, you can be seen for just a minute. Don't I have a good wife? But she didn't want to show you her nightie. I said it is early. It's actually 8 a.m. now in Sydney here, so there is sunlight. Oh, I might just turn that light off. Yes, that's good. That's better. It's not in my eyes, but it was dark when I started here. Oh, hot, hot, hot. Oh, my morning cup of coffee. I don't know if you've heard, but Australians have become quite fussy about their coffee. We're laid back about everything now except our coffee. Laid back, not laid back. I really haven't looked at the comments. When drawing, if one draws in a small pocket-sized sketch pad versus a larger, do you feel that drawing a number of drawings like 20 or 40 in one versus the other is going to result in more progress? Yes, yes. As I think Joman mentioned, one thing I've come to realize in all of my drawing is because my drawings have shifted to smaller bits of paper, it's just easier for the whole video process to try and do videos that where the drawing for me doesn't take more than 15 to 40 minutes, because then I don't have to make them ridiculously fast to be a video that people will watch to the end, which has advantages for creators on YouTube. And so I've been doing smaller subjects on smaller bits of paper. But what I've learned, what I've come to, and I sort of always knew this because I'm a trained teacher, but what I've come to learn is that we definitely have we have a learning cycle in everything. And in drawing, it's completing a drawing, because what's the drawing cycle? I find a reference, I work out what I'm going to do, and I do it. And then I've done it and I look at it and I think, how does it look? Does this drawing pass? Or do I need to do it again because I've actually learnt things by the things that I can see aren't right? Or have I learned that this drawing's way too hard for me and I need to go back to a simpler subject? Because if I keep doing drawings, if I keep choosing subjects that I can't draw well, I will become very good at drawing bad drawings. And that's not a good way to learn. We can't stay in a comfort zone forever. We won't learn to draw that way either. But if I consistently do drawings where I don't do them very well, I will not improve. I will not improve. And let me tell you, I did this drawing recently. I've had this photo for a year and a quarter. It was December of 2023. We went to Hobart, which is where this photo was taken. And I really loved the building and I really wanted to draw it. But, in all honesty, I didn't feel ready to draw it until a couple of months ago. I just felt that I was going to draw it badly, and I just didn't feel that I had what I wanted to have in my head, because it's our understanding that's the key thing. It's not learning the hatching patterns. It's understanding what I'm doing. It's having a theoretical framework to understand what I'm doing when I sit down with a pen before I put any ink on the paper. It's working out how I want my drawing to look, visualizing my drawing at the end before I start. And I visualize how it looks because I understand the process of drawing it in my head, and I understand the options of mark making that I have with whatever I have in my hand. And I work out the best way to create and combine those marks to create the scene at the end that I want. And certainly, when you draw something such as this, it doesn't come together till the last, 20 minutes. Someone walks in halfway through, they may not even have any idea what you're drawing. So in some ways, it's our process, our understanding process that, and then the marks we make in response to that create the scene. We don't copy the subject. We create a visual effect on the paper with our marks. And it's changing these, I used to think, oh, this was just pretentious, twaddle, just draw it, No, actually, what we do comes from how we think. And if we feel limited in what we know how to do, it's because our thinking is too limited, and we need to change the way we think. We need to get a deeper understanding of what's happening. And as I said at the very start, making these videos has forced me to put into words the kind of vague reasons and thoughts I have, but it's made me clarify them. And that clarity has vastly accelerated the rate of my drawing improvement. And the fact that I do, 30-minute drawings every day means my learning cycles are short. And therefore I learn, but more frequent. If I did 6-hour drawings, and I shudder every time someone says, oh, I do drawings that take me 3 hours, and I think, well, I hope you're a professional, because you're really wasting your time if you have kind of reached a good high level of work, because otherwise you're just taking 3-4 hours to learn probably what you could learn with a simpler drawing in 20 minutes, in 30 minutes. You could be learning, if you do 3-hour drawings versus 30-minute drawings, you could be learning 6 times faster. You could be reaching levels. You could have already reached levels that you're only imagining being able to reach now by doing these long drawings. And I drew this, and it's not just the problems. I look at my drawings and I think, what's really worked as well as what's the problem. I mean, in all honesty, without trying to blow my trumpet, I don't have many drawings now where I have disasters. I still do. I've had 1 or 2 drawings that I erased the video. I didn't keep the record of the disaster that I created. But most of the time now, I'm actually looking to see, this looks really good. So why, or this part of it, I mean, this looks really effective. So when I finish this, I realized that in the photo, and this is yesterday's drawing, not the day before. This is Saturday's drawing. It's Monday morning now here in Australia, because Australia is ahead of the rest of the world, except for New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. But I was really happy with the way that palm tree, I think, looks like it's behind the building. I did think, though, I probably want to just very slightly strengthen that line to bring it forward. So I tell you what, I'm going to do it now. And part of me says, oh, be careful you don't wreck it. But that thought is the one that will hold us back in our art improvement more than any other. The fear that I'm going to wreck it, so I won't try. And this is why I say over and over again, you're not producing artwork, not producing artworks, you're learning to draw. And this is a drawing exercise. And if you view every bit of paper you pick up and every session of putting marks on it as a drawing exercise, as practice, it takes all this pressure off you, and you will create artworks. Artworks will happen, but it's not your focus, because if you're learning, you can't be hung up on making mistakes. You've got to be free enough in your head to take risks and to learn. And I've learned not to let even the fact that I'm recording everything. So I'm just going to just stop jabbering for a sec, and I'm going to just put these marks on. Because, and I think that works better. I'm glad I took the risk. Let's see what you think. I just strengthened that line a little bit because I didn't want to make it as heavy as this line here, because it is further back, but it's not much further back. But this palm tree is much further back behind. It's a very tall one. It's not right at the back of the house. It's a little bit away from the house. In the photo, because of the lighting and the colors and stuff, it actually looks like it's on the same plane, like it's very dark and green, and we can see a lot of detail in the photo that makes it feel too close. So when I drew it, I deliberately drew it to create the sense of it being further back. And let me actually got the photo up here, I'm sure. It's has to be filed away. But see, I think if you know, we know it's behind the house just because of the positioning, but I think it sort of almost looks like it's hanging over the house in terms of its visual prominence. But I want to create the sense that it's sitting further back, because that's the reality of the situation. Oops, let me see. That's the reality of the situation. So so I control my marks, and I wanted this part of the house to come forward because that part of the house is closer, and so forth. So it's all about controlling, constraining my mark making to create the effect of life, not necessarily the effect of the photo. Again, I keep talking about we need to see the photo as our starting point, not as our end goal to copy. So yeah, and look, please, if you haven't hit the like button and you're finding this helpful, then please hit the like button for me. That would be, thank you, someone did. That would be very helpful. Are you in New Zealand, Expelliarmus? Because yes, that is one of the few places in the world ahead. Okay. 6 hours is a fast drawing for a pro. It depends on the drawing. Of course, it depends how large it is and how much detail there is and how precise it needs to be. Some subjects are intrinsically more demanding for precision than others. If I draw an Australian bush scene and this plant down here is like half a centimeter to the left, well, no one's going to notice. But if I'm doing a portrait and one eye is half a centimeter out of position, well, you're going to notice, aren't you? So some subjects are more forgiving than others. That's great, Brazen. Yeah. If I want to copy the photo, well, just hit 2 copies. That's a lot quicker, and I'll get a much better copy. So So can I suggest that if you want now my way of understanding drawing, of course, is not the only way, and I don't present how to draw necessarily in the way that drawing courses, traditional teaching presents it. I don't necessarily use the same language because I really haven't read the books. I haven't done the courses. I haven't watched the videos. So I've really drawn myself and worked out what works happily for me. And then I've tried to work out what am I doing. But what I found was that lately, my understanding of the process is kind of running ahead now of what I'm doing. So it used to be I draw and work out, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Why has this worked? And now I find that my understanding of a process of drawing, it's not it's a process of drawing, has helped me to create certain areas of understanding of, and now those areas of understanding they affect, but they guide me in making better choices with my mark making on the paper for creating a realistic effect or a dramatic effect, whatever effect I'm after in that scene. And a really important part of that is this learning cycle, just to get back to what I've become distracted from, is this learning cycle. And it's not just saying what looks inaccurate, it's also saying what worked, what did create the effect I was after, or maybe not as much as I was hoping for, but I can see I'm on the right track with that. I need to put a little more thought and effort, and varying the darkness of various parts and lines is, I think, more and more important. And the problem, if you weren't here at the start, this was one of the first drawings of a house I did. I think it was the first house I drew as a domestic house for the video. And you can see that it's very much lines outlining shapes, and the lines are all the same. Whether I'm doing hatching in the tree, whether I'm doing hatching under the little porch area, whether I'm doing hatching to outline the walls or the windows, all the lines are pretty much the same. Whereas when we look at what's happening here, there is a lot greater variety in the lines. Not just the hatching for the bricks, which is at 0.05, which I don't usually use, but I think it's actually quite a good one in conjunction with a 0.2, which is what the rest of this is, to create the effect of the brickwork without over creating the effect of the brickwork. Whenever I see bricks suggested on buildings, usually the line work for the brickwork is exactly the same as the line work for the rest of the building. And what that means is we visually create the effect that the bricks are as prominent, the joins between the bricks even are as prominent. And it's just not true. It's just not true. I look at this and I can see the bricks. I can tell that it's brick. But when I kind of look at it, the brickwork, the visual sort of clarity of the brickwork is way, way, way less. It's a 20th of the visual kind of clarity of the window, say, maybe 30 times less. And yet, if I draw the window and then I start to draw the bricks and I'm using the same pen and the same lines, I end up with a wall that's almost black with ink if I'm trying to capture the scale, which would be impossible with the same pen, with the same thickness, because the relative thickness of the line is so much less. But also just with the color, with the value that's created, because when I draw a line on the paper, I'm not just defining shape, I'm creating value. And if my lines are close enough together, I could create a very dark value. And so what happens is people want to draw the bricks or suggest the bricks, and the bricks end up being more obvious than the walls. And so trying to suggest the bricks, but have the wall or the window, whatever, the main thing, that's part of the effect I'm going for. And I think that's why I think thinking of drawing the effect of what we see, not necessarily drawing the detail, is important. And the other thing I started doing with bricks, and I don't think I've done a how to. Maybe I should do another how to draw bricks video, because this is a focus I didn't have when I made those. But as so we have the horizontal lines and we have the little vertical lines. I've realized that the horizontal lines are great. Even in people doing a reasonable job, the vertical lines are often the problem for different reasons. And I've discovered that often just doing dots to suggest the vertical lines ends up looking far more realistic. Yeah, it gives the effect more accurately than doing the vertical lines, which it's like the vertical lines are almost too much detail. So now I'm starting to draw it too precisely, whereas the dots, instead of vertical, preferably the dots sort of on the horizontal lines, but not necessarily. Sometimes the dots go dot 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 dot, and they land where they land, like a shotgun blast. Yeah. I'll just look at a few of these questions. Going back to tangles, I'm struggling with getting pleasing effect for tall, thick grass when it's just behind or even surrounding my wildlife subject room. Look, I think with grasses, it's I did a drawing. I did a live session drawing not long ago. I'm just back at my piles of drawings, trying to remember which pile this will be on. Is it here? Or is it over here? There's a house involved, so maybe it's in my house drawings. Just chat amongst yourselves, please. No, I can't see it there. Can't see it there. Can't see it there. But I can maybe make use of this for the same thing, Brazen, where so if you look at my grasses here, because these are all grasses basically, some of them are big tufts of grass, some of them are small tufts of grass, but I've used my hatching not to draw grass, but to create the values. And sometimes I'm emphasizing the shadows at the base of the tufts of grass. Sometimes I'm using hatching behind to represent the light on the top. I'm not actually drawing all of those blades of grass in. I'm creating the darkness coming down from behind that actually in life highlights that. The problem is I know grasses, lots of line-like blades, and so I start to draw what I know is there. Instead of drawing the effect of what I'm seeing, instead of drawing the overall effect of all of the blades of grass together, which really is reduced to the light and the darks, I start to draw what I know is there, and that's the problem. Grass is a great example of drawing the effect of detail. It's as troublesome as leaves, but the answer is as simple: to see the whole thing at once as values of lights and darks, to stop seeing the leaves as leaves, stop seeing the blades of grass as little lines, which in effect, when we start to draw little lines in because we know they're there, we're really creating a symbol now for what's there, because a line doesn't actually accurately capture a blade of grass either. So yeah, all of those things. So here's another house. I did find this one, another fairly recent house with a lighter feel to it. Maybe this one's a little blotchy looking, and I've actually, since I'm trying out a new pen, I'm trying out uni pens at the moment. Which actually just, I think, are a little less blotchy than the Copics I was using, or at least my Copics that I was using. Maybe it was partly how old they were or whatever. Maybe I should have changed the nibs. But I can't get a 0.2 anymore in Copic, and I really like drawing with 0.2, and I can with Unipen. And because I like to use a range of pens in the one drawing, or I like to have the option. I don't always, but I like to have the opportunity to. And I am a great believer in you only use one brand of pen in one drawing for all sorts of reasons. I have videos on that, but yeah. But I did feel that I was starting to get like a little bit blotchy. But again, you can see the brickwork just on that porch. They're weatherboards behind. But anyway, but certainly a softer feel to the drawing, and I use softer as than so this is, I think, I think this is a maturing of my drawing style from this to this. You might think, well, it's just a change. I don't think one's more mature than the other, but I think there's more understanding and subtlety in what I'm doing now, and it goes back to, I think, my evolving understanding of my drawing process. So at the start, naturally enough, I did focus on accuracy of shape, and I developed fairly accurate drawings. I mean, that wasn't actually a drawing. That was, I can just grab a drawing from here. So here's a scene. This one's more of a drawing. Notice that it's larger. I hadn't yet learnt that I would learn more faster as well as making shorter videos by drawing smaller. But this is again is an early YouTube drawing, and if you look, yeah, my the same pen used throughout. And yeah, look, it's in some ways a nice drawing. It's an accurate drawing. The perspective's accurate. The foreshortening's accurate. The proportions are accurate enough that they're not going to, stand out as being problematic. The cars look real enough. The figure's probably the weakest point, but it's not too bad. The tree bit looks like a tree bit, and the spire doesn't look like it's half falling over. So, yeah. In lots of ways, a nice kind of drawing, but it doesn't sort of capture the sense of sort of reality that I think, or even something that is a complex drawing. I think there's a stronger sense that this is a real thing, and this is more some sort of stylized version of it, because lines alone are not an adequate way to capture the visual possibilities of life, but if we think marks, we're going to have a better go. So I think, before I round up on that, I'll just have a quick look at some of the comments here. I can't remember drawing why. Yeah, I actually was thinking the other day, I follow a guy on Instagram, Jan, Yann. I think it's Leroy, Leroi, French architect, I think he is, does amazing drawings. And he does a lot of colored paper, often a kind of a mid value, which lets you then go dark with some black crayon, and light with some white crayon. And so you use the paper color as the mid value and create the scene with the extremes of light and dark. And I thought, I should try that one day. So I've certainly got enough colored paper here. I don't know that I certainly don't have a white pen, but yeah, maybe I'll need to think about that. You've been chatting amongst yourselves. What I think about when to stop. Okay. Look, it's not knowing when to stop, I think, is a problem. And sometimes I still think, I look at my drawing at the end and I think, whoa, I just kept going, didn't I? And I mean, even if I look at this, see, I look at this, and I'm really happy with it in so many ways. I'm really happy with the built-in. What I'm not happy with is the foliage in the in it's the upper right corner. Um, I'm not happy with that because it's too fussy. I should have because of this. I think what happened was I'd have to check, but I think I drew this before I drew this, and that was a less helpful order because this is so busy and this is so busy that I think I should have actually simplified my marks to create the effect of the foliage so that there was less there, particularly here, so that there was more obvious separation between the different subjects. And I mean, what do you think? What do you think? I feel like this, though, the marks here are getting, they're too similar now to the marks here, which means this is all starting to blur and to read as the one thing. And I needed, if you like, a wider band of white. I mean, in a subtle way, but I think that's what I needed. And what happened was I began to draw this in isolation from the rest of the scene. Now, as you know, I'm quite experienced in drawing bushes and shrubs and trees and stuff. And so I feel very comfortable. But my problem was I kind of slipped into auto mind and I stopped looking at the reference. Um, and I stopped looking at the effect of this in context in the reference, and then more importantly, in my drawing, because no one's looking at the reference. You're only looking at this. And so this is how you read. See, there's wonderful contrast between these dark areas and the architecture around, and there's a bit of white space around to help these work better. But I feel like, yes, and so it would have been nice with a similar value effect here, up here. So darker and lighter, not so much mid. Would have worked really nicely, I think, and would have let this then been the undisputed kind of detail king of the drawing or queen, whatever. Yeah. Um, But so, in terms of knowing when to stop, I've been talking lately in my videos, and this is a fairly recent point for me. But before I start, I try and visualize how the drawing looks at the end. And I mean in as much detail as I can. I try to see what I've drawn as if it's on the paper. Now, that obviously, if I can do that, then I only have to copy what I see in my imagination. But it also gets me thinking of things such as value and overall effect. I want these to be the dark, these to be the light. I want this to be the focal point. I want this to feel very far away. I want these to feel very close. I'm going to get rid of that completely because it just isn't necessary. If you, I don't know if you noticed, but if you look at this, there's a big street lamppost there. Well, I didn't think that was at all useful to my drawing, so I didn't draw it. That one of the ways we improve the drawing is to rearrange the composition as much as is necessary to get a better one. And better simply means one that suits what we want to do. So, again, if I think I'm copying the photo, then I can feel guilty if I leave something out. Well, that's crazy. It's amazing the ridiculous mind games we end up with when we're drawing. So I stop when I've created the scene that I visualized. I stop when I feel that what I've got is looking good. And when I don't, that's when I'm likely to overdraw. So that's when I'm likely to, but again, it depends on my purpose. So in this drawing, this video was about capturing the different effects of hang on, how can I say it? I chose a scene that had lots and lots of different trees, different types of trees, from a hedge from lawn to a hedge down the front to sort of shrubby things that at human level to different types of trees, pine trees, fir trees, some just good old Australian green leaf trees. And how do we convey with our marks that we're looking at a lot of different trees, different colors, different greens, some dark greens, some very pale, that have very different silhouette edges. Um, so how do I show all that using black ink and create clarity, and also obviously this very nice little sort of architectural feature of this pavilion, or it's or rotunda. I'm not exactly sure what its purposes were, whether you're sitting at your lunch there or the band is there and plays. But so it was all about finding the right marks that would create clarity. And again, look look over here. No, over here particularly, I've drawn that closest tree, whether it's a fir or a pine. It's probably some sort of fir. um, I've mostly drawn that by not drawing anything and hatching the shadows of what's behind. And again, when we have lots and lots of layers, lots of depth of plane of foliage and grasses, this is how I do it. I try and create bands. In this case, they're vertical bands. With grasses, it's more often horizontal bands. And the silhouette edges are really important. Um, whether we create them negatively or whether we ink them in positively, the marks that we make that are going to be silhouettes in the finished drawing, so important to put effort into capturing them carefully, because the brain rushes to those, sees them quickly, and wants to be able to make assumptions about what it's looking at so it can move on, and do all the other things a busy brain needs to do. Keep your heart going and whatnot, looking out for dangers. And so, yeah, the brain has all sorts of shortcuts in the way it operates. And we want to, as artists, take advantage of that to get more bang for our marks, so to speak. Um, Yeah. Okay, Jacqueline, just continuing your yeah. So I think when do I stop? I stop when I've achieved what I'm trying to achieve. And if I haven't visualized how my drawing looks at the end, then I don't know if I've achieved it or not. Um, but of course, I haven't made the video on this yet, I don't think, but oh, maybe I did. But I've certainly become very aware in the last 18 months of the rhythm of a drawing session. And I think that's a very good reason, unless we're really pushing to become a professional artist, or we have commissions that are complex, that we basically do a drawing in one session that I start and I finish. And whether it's a 10-minute or a 3-hour drawing, I get it done in that day. Now, of course, I can have breaks and have lunch and stuff, but because what happens when we draw is, I think we build up when we start. The hardest part's the start. We're having to establish placement. We're having to establish scale and proportion. We have very little on the paper to guide us with marks that we then put on the paper. And so we go slower, and we're really positioning rather than creating a drawing effect. Because when we do create and put marks for the effect, we want them to be in the right place. We want what's created to look accurate, even if we're not drawing lines. So, but as we do that, the tempo, the rhythm picks up, and um, and we start to draw more confidently, faster. We've positioned all these things, and now we can get involved in the mark making and creating effects, confident of where we're placing things. And so the tempo picks up, and yeah, there is just a lot more confidence. We've warmed up our eye-hand coordination. We've done a lot of careful observation that we still have. And it's not just observing the forms and the shapes, it's observing the values, and it's working out in our drawing where we want the visual rhythm of the finished drawing to look. So where the darks are, where the lights are, how we're exaggerating or minimizing what's in the reference for various reasons. And so the flow of where we direct people to look in what we draw. All of that, we've worked that out, and now we're just doing it. And so the pace picks up. And there are also things that we learn to do in the second half, that we have to do in the second half of the drawing, that we don't do in the first. And one of those things is finishing. It's learning to slow down, not quite to a dead stop. It's like the train coming into the station. And as we reach this period, the momentum slowing down of our mark making, our observation now, not just of our reference, but of our drawing, is increasing. So the time we're now not furiously doing hatching 1,000 million hatching lines, we're putting a lot of that time into simply looking at our drawing and saying, what needs tweaking? Maybe looking back at our reference just to get another understanding of what's happening. But it may be now that I'm totally guided by my drawing. I'm not looking or thinking about my reference at all. I'm thinking, well, is this dark enough? And I mean, if you only just come in, I did this drawing the other day, 2 days ago. And when I was looking at it afterwards, I was thinking, this line here isn't strong enough because it feels like it's the same depth of plane as the tree behind. And I was thinking, I should have just done it a little bit stronger. And so I did it, like just in this session, just strengthened it slightly, still trying to keep it slightly less than this because I want this to feel closer. So I just put some three very light lines here. And I think it snapped into the right depth of plane from doing that. Now, ideally, if I hadn't been so eager to do the voiceover and edit and get it posted and move on with my day, I would have looked at this and seen that as part of the drawing session rather than seeing it the next day thinking, oh, it's a shame I didn't just do, 10 seconds of line work, and just because it is a fairly important, sort of visually fairly important part. But, I've done it now. And, but that's part of the skills we develop in finishing a drawing as the train slows down to come into the station and slows down more and more, and we just do the odd little bits that we can do. If we draw with pencil, we might be having an eraser and be just redefining some edges or softening the effect of something rather than strengthening the effect of something. With a pen, of course, I can't soften anything, but I can make something look softer by strengthening what's around it. So relatively, I can make it look different. So yeah. And of course, we can just, one way to know whether you're finished or not, if I can just finish this comment, Jacqueline, is one way you can know if you're finished or not is to finish that physical session, but not finish the drawing, and just leave it there and come back a few hours later, or in my case, the next day. And when I looked at it the next day, I thought, that just isn't quite strong enough. And probably if I was, the only reason that I didn't actually pick up the pen and add those marks then was I thought, oh, well, I finished that. And by that, I meant I finished the video. I haven't finished the drawing because it is a bit of a different mindset when you're drawing for a video. It's kind of, well, I've moved on. I'll be doing a new demo with a new video. So, but yeah, it was actually very useful for this video to have had those few lines to put on. So I hope that's been helpful, Jacqueline. To be honest, thanks, Joan. I like to evaluate. I mean, every possible not only its monetary value. That's what's supposed to. Oh goodness, I can never evaluate art for a monetary value. I've got, I'm one of these people who thinks, well, if I did it, it can't be too hard. So it's not can't be worth too much. I think that says more about my upbringing than my art. But anyway. But look, honestly, trying to put a value on anything is so difficult.
let alone an artwork. Anything's only worth what it's worth to the person who wants it. So that's still a pretty difficult framework to use. But look, honestly, if we're learning to draw, we shouldn't even be remotely thinking about what's this worth. If I'm worried about what it's worth, then that means my focus is on creating artworks, and my focus should be on learning to draw. If my focus is on creating artworks, my focus will be not making mistakes that will stuff it up as being an artwork and meaning that I can't sell it. And if I'm worried about making mistakes, I will never take the risks and develop the confidence and in the way I make marks. And I'll be trying to go faster all the time. I'll be trying to do the hacks, the shortcuts. Yeah, because I'm keen to be selling, which means I've got to get to the end rather than develop and sit in the process of learning. And now obviously drawing is one of those things that we never get to the end. I've been drawing, I've got probably 600, 700, 800 drawings on bits of paper around me in this room. And I'm still learning. And I hope that's one of the things that comes across in my videos that I thought my videos and my drawings were fine like 3 years ago. If I hadn't thought this was kind of presentable, I wouldn't have had the boldness to make a video and post it to the world, but I've learned a huge amount since then. I've learned a huge amount because I've been developing my understanding of what the drawing process is. And at every point where suddenly a little light globe's gone bing, and I've understood something, whether it's to do with accuracy of shape, whether it's to do with depth of plane, whether it's to do with seeing and finding marks for 3 dimensions, whether it's to do with hatching that goes beyond just shade and shadow. And as I said before, my latest focus is on edges and the fact that a thick, heavy, straight, like when we draw, if I can get back to my cartoony house, where have I put it? That when we, excuse me, that when we draw with lines that are the same, we get a certain cartoon-like effect. Now, this doesn't look cartoony just from the amount of detail. Well, sorry, it doesn't look like a cartoon because of the amount of detail in it. But with a little simplification, this would look quite cartoon-like. But that doesn't happen with this one because my mark making has become more varied, more subtle, more nuanced, and more versatile. And that, the difference between this and this, is my understanding of the drawing process, of a drawing process, of my drawing process that's changed as well. It's developed. And it's at no point that I thought, oh, that's not right. But I've just learned of more and more ways that I can push the understanding I have into new areas, into new possibilities, into new new areas. And I if you like, my breakout video, drawing the effect of detail, was originally for me a way of, in my thinking, in my understanding of the drawing process, it was the way we can draw overwhelming detail. And so, I developed it in my oil painting days, painting tree canopies. And how do you paint leaves? You can't paint a leaf with a brush, even if you can see it. Even more so with a black line. How do I draw a tree canopy? Well, I don't try and draw the leaves, which means I have to not see the leaves. I have to try and create the effect of all the leaves together, for that tree at that distance in that lighting. So I also became aware of how important the conditions were, because I also want to create that sense of distance and of the lighting of that day on that tree. And I became aware that these things all changed according to the type of tree it was too, the way the leaves hung on the branches and the way the branches distributed the foliage and all of this, and then but I became aware that these were all implications when you began to try and draw the effect of the detail, not to draw the actual detail. So I kind of worked on that in my oil painting. Then when I started drawing for Instagram, and that kind of developed into these big. If you've never seen my Instagram account, here, I got one. I actually found that. I just find. So these were drawn from very generous Parisian photographers who let me draw from their photos, and if they hadn't given me permission, it would have been a copyright infringement. So if you can draw from anything when you're just learning to draw, but if you draw from a photo that you didn't take, a little copyright law here, that you didn't take, that's an infringement if you don't have the permission of the person who took it. That's if you want to use it for commercial values. There is provision for educational purposes and stuff, and you just draw anything in your home and throw it on the pile. No one's going to know. But legally, you shouldn't put that drawing on a mug or make prints if you didn't take the image without the permission of the image taker, because the photographer is just as much a part of that artwork as you drawing it. The photographer has used their creativity and their skill for the composition and the lighting and all these things that you haven't even thought of that they've done. You just thought, oh, that's a nice photo, I'm going to draw that. Well, actually, you're standing on the shoulders of the photographer, and you need to credit that. Having said that, I honestly don't know whose photographic work this is because I just grabbed it. But on Instagram, I always credit the photographer in as a tag, but also as in the credits. But the point is, I would draw subjects. So these aren't freehand. These are done by 4x4 grid on the photo and on the paper. And I do a pencil under drawing, and then I ink over that. I do the ink drawing over the top of the pencil. But the detail that we have in a place such as Pelagonia is a real challenge when we draw. I mean, look at the lights, just the effect of lights, the effect of detail, how to create. I realized that what I was doing was I was creating the effect of the architectural detail, not the detail. I didn't actually even realize I was doing that until I began to get consistent comments of people saying, oh, I loved all the detail, but when I zoomed in to look at it in close up, it wasn't there. You just made it look like the detail was there. And it was from those comments that I began to think, yeah, I do that, don't I? I sort of draw the feel, or the word I began to use, the effect of the detail without drawing the detail. And then I connected that with the way I did trees. And now I had words and a concept of understanding. Now I began to understand that more, and that let me refine it and develop it more. What I've come to understand is that drawing the effect is not just something we do with detail. It's something we do with everything. I'm not just drawing the effect of detail, and I still use that phrase when that's what I'm talking about. But conceptually, in my drawing process, I'm now thinking in terms of drawing the visual effect of something in my drawing, because everything's capturing the effect of how it looks. And that effect for a given subject changes with my distance, with the perspective angle, with the lighting, with the atmospheric conditions, whether it's foggy or not, with the distance, the effect visually, the effect of how even with where I'm looking at in the scene, the effect of the visual effect of something will change according to all of these variables. And of course, there, if you like, the physical variables, there's the artistic variables, how I want my drawing to look, what parts of my drawing I want to emphasize, I want to stand out. If I have a visual goal overriding goal, that will then layer on top of those, if you like, physical variables. But all of these things are balls I'm juggling in the air when I put marks on the paper. And, sometimes I may let one ball drop and end up putting more ink on the paper too quickly. And then, but again, if I'm looking at this now, I could be thinking, well, I can't lighten any areas, but I can darken areas. And that might be a way of linking it with these areas, which could work, as well as creating the distinction that this is something different. And again, because when I do my drawings, I'm doing them for video. So once the video is finished, I tend to stop thinking about the drawing. But if I were working on drawings for my own sake, then coming back and looking at thinking, yeah, look, that's not, a few days later, I'm thinking, yeah, it's a bit mid-value up there. I can't get more white there. So can I play around with more dark to create the effect and the balance in the values that I think would work better in that scene? So now my overriding thinking is, what's the visual effect in reality first, and then what visual effect do I want to create in my drawing? I also got a few more comments. Oh, thanks, Jacqueline. I hope it's at least interesting to everyone, and for some people anyway. I hope it develops, helps developing your drawing process. In the end, the drawing process we develop should be the one that leads us to create the sorts of drawings we want to create. Now, at the start, when we learn to draw, that's too, we don't have enough understanding and experience, both of what drawing's about and also what our drawings look like, to be able to have a goal, except getting better, which is a pretty vague goal, but it's a realistic goal at the start, because almost any improvement, like almost any change, will be getting better from the very start. But as we kind of start to move into some experience level, we should be always thinking, how can my drawing improve? How can this drawing look better? And can you see the problem when we're thinking all the time of mistakes? Yes, critiquing is, and we should critique every drawing. Critiquing is, what mistakes have I made here? What things obviously aren't right? But we clear that out of the way quickly, because the more important question is, what can I do better? And that's not necessarily mistakes. That's, how can I use the things that are working to work better, to create a better overall effect? If you're finding, again, these ramblings helpful, please hit the like button for me. If you haven't, please do that right now. If you're listening and you haven't hit that like button, that'd be great. But yeah, how can I improve on this? Because that's really what we're after. It's not making mistakes, but it's doing great drawings that look really effective in some way. So that's where my focus I need to go beyond the negative into the positive. I need to get rid of the mistakes, but that now sets me up to say, okay, so I'm not going to do that next drawing, but what else can I do to develop what I'm doing? Is very important. Okay, well, I think I might just steer clear of the 5-year-old and the who paints the Mona Lisa and how much that's worth. I'll let you guys work that out. Actually, I gains much from the conceptual context of the involved history. Yep. And look, I think good. Like I obviously draw, aim for realism. But one painter, as I've got older, I've actually come to love their work more and more, is Rothko. And if you don't know his work, that's his last name, Rothko. Have a look, and it might surprise you that he's become a more and more a favorite of mine as I've got older. And I didn't see it in the little art books when I was at school with little black and white photos that were this size of his work. But now that I've had the privilege of traveling to some galleries that have his work, and there's a few of them in Australia too, to stand in front of them, I just find the color, the vibrance, there's just a vitality within these large, in some ways, static forms, swatches of color, but there's a resonance in the way he's layered the colors, and in the enormity of the blocks of color. And I don't know, I just find them very mesmerizing, and I would love to have a room at home that was uncluttered enough to put an original Rothko on the wall, and just to be able to enjoy all the potential that's in it. So, there are lots of ways we can create effect, and there are lots of effects to create that aren't literal, and there are lots of materials we can use to create them. So, but at any given moment, it's what am I aiming at now? And as I said at the start, because I've been making videos, the videos have forced me to think about what I'm doing more, because I've had to put it into words for the video and for the instruction. And because it wasn't taught me by a teacher, I didn't have their words already, or I didn't have a video I could say, look at this or whatever. But that's forced me to put it into words, which has then given me more intent, more deliberateness when I do draw, because I'm, if you like, I'm listening to what I'm saying. When I speak in a video, I might be trying to teach you, but I'm teaching myself. I'm reinforcing things that I've stumbled along to find, and that whole process, they become stronger. And then when I do my next drawing, I'm aware of that. And then I'm aware of things that are still a bit vague, where I feel like I'm making improvements in this area, or I'm understanding something a little bit more. And it might take me months of drawing before that actually comes with clarity of words, of understanding the concepts, But at the start, at least, it gives me direction in my drawing. And so what comes first, the understanding or the drawing? Well, they seem to leapfrog each other in different ways down the path, but that at some point, being able to have a conceptual framework, a theoretical understanding of what my drawing process is for the goal of my drawings at the end, is vital to give us direction. And the other thing it gives us, and I haven't mentioned this at all, I think, in this video, despite it being, 2 hours long, I will wind up soon, is that it starts to develop a consistency in style. And I know that for many people in their drawing, they can have been even drawing for a number of years, and they're frustrated because they don't feel they have a consistent style. That every drawing, I've had people say, I've got 200 drawings and everyone looks like a different person's drawn it. And I think that's when we don't have a consistent theoretical understanding of what the drawing process is. And particularly if we're used to copying other people's drawings, in a sense, we're kind of just grabbing a bit of this understanding, but we don't know what that is. A bit of another person's understanding, and I still don't know what their understanding is, but I've grabbed how that looks, and I've grabbed another bit of understanding from someone else. And it's almost like I cut little bits out of other people's drawings and try to paste them together and make a drawing. That although I've made all the actual marks, really very little of it's mine. And there's no single place that those marks have come from. And so then when I go to do another drawing, I still don't have a place. And I can create lots of drawings that way, but it's really a mosaic of other people's understandings that I don't share. And again, if we watch videos where we just see the drawing appear, we don't see the reference, and we don't have some explanation of what the artist is doing, I think it could have great entertainment value, but I think it has almost negligible educational value, learning value, teaching value, because seeing marks appear without understanding is almost like a magic trick. And I think it's actually dishonest if there's a reference photo just off camera that the person doing the drawing doesn't even tell you it's there, because the chances are you may be thinking that they're doing this out of their head, and that gives you an unrealistic expectation of what you might be doing if you watch this channel. In fact, they're looking at something and they're translating it into marks, and you don't even get to make assumptions about how they translate the photo into ink on the paper to create an effect, because you can't see that photo. You don't even know if they're copying from a photo or not, And so, as I said, it can be entertaining, and that's fine. It's great to watch things. I watch movies to entertain me, and I don't intend to learn to draw from them. And so that can be the case. I post reels where I have a time lapse where I can't show the reference because it doesn't fit in the framework, the orientation of the paper. And that's just for entertainment. No one's going to learn to draw from watching them, But yeah, if we don't get the understanding, then we don't get the foundation that sets us up to be able to draw. Because it's when all the marks come from the same understanding of the drawing process, now they start to have a consistency that works towards a consistent goal for not necessarily for every mark, but a consistent goal for an overall drawing. So now we start to develop consistency, and it's that consistency that develops our drawing style. And it's not locked in place. It can change, all of that, blah, 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 as mine has changed. There are some things that have been common. There are some really basic fundamental things that have been common throughout the whole process, including the fact that I want my drawing to look real at the end. But I may decide I want to develop a more abstract style. And so with that different understanding of where I want to end up, I now start to develop different techniques. I need to draw in different ways because I want to get to a different place at the end. Too many people, when we learn to draw, we're just looking at photos and trying to copy and impatient to produce artworks. We're trying to find shortcuts that will give us bits of paper with ink on it that we think we can sell or print or whatever, instead of learning to understand what's happening when we draw. What is the process? We can learn a skill efficiently, which will make it a shorter process, but there are no true shortcuts. You can't jump to the head of a queue. You can walk faster than others and maybe get there before them in a time frame, but then you might have started further back or closer to the front than they did anyway. So it's not a competition, but there is no secret magic shortcut. But there are better ways to learn. There are faster ways, because learning itself is a skill. We can learn to learn better. And I hope that's one of the things that my videos do. They teach us how we learn. I'm not an art teacher. I was barely an art student at school. I never used to do anything because I was too self-conscious of my, drawing looking terrible. And so I just didn't want to do anything. And we had a couple of really talented people in my class at school, which was good and bad. And it was great to see what they did, but it made me even less want to do anything in public, which is pretty ironic now when you think about it. And that crippled me for decades. But from a drawing point of view, but yeah, the more intent I have, the more intention I can then have in my mark making, the greater consistency I can develop. And over time, my drawing will change, my drawing style will change. And if I look at, if I look at my original house, original in terms of when I was making videos, and I look at the last one I've done, I think my drawing style has matured. And that's not to criticize it here, but I think there's more possibilities of what I can achieve. And if I wanted to draw a house that looked more cartoon-like for a particular purpose, if I wanted to have perhaps an oversimplified shape emphasis with my line work, I could. If that's what I want to do, I can in a sense go backwards at any stage to any point in my journey. But because I think I've gone further now in this latest drawing I've done, um, I've gone further. Um, yeah, I've got more possibilities. I've experimented with more things that I can now choose from in terms of what I try to create. So my style has developed. My style has become more, I think, mature, more sophisticated. I've got a greater range of things I can do, when it comes to, depth of plane, when it comes to creating a sense of three dimensions, when it comes from hatching, when it comes from the edges and even the aim of what I'm trying to do in the edges, and then the technique to capture those aims. If I see every outline as just, oh, that's where I put a line because I'm defining a shape, rather than that edge is a very important place of information for the visual effect, impact, meaning of what I draw. So therefore, what marks will create that edge in as helpful a way as possible. Very different ways of thinking. And as I've shifted to the more sophisticated way of sophisticated is a bit of a, I don't know, it's a bit of a class laden term, I think, almost like, whether it sounds snooty or it's just a handy word. Um, um, but um, but a more developed, a more nuanced way of putting marks on the paper, and therefore the effects we can create with more nuanced combinations, more sophisticated combinations of those marks, then our drawing style will mature. As I said, there is no right way, but my style for what I'm trying to do will mature. Yeah. No, I don't think everyone in manga, German, is copying everyone else any more than that happens in any other genre of drawing. I really don't. I think it happens everywhere, and I think it's partly because people with energy, enthusiasm, but not a great deal of teaching, um, think that if I copy what someone else is doing, that's a way of being able to do that myself. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, and that can just set us up for frustration. Um, in some, I mean, it's a bit hard for me to talk about manga because I don't really follow it. I used to love comics when I was a kid, but of course, manga is a far more developed art form now than the Superman comics I used to read that were probably inked in the 50s and still being reprinted in the 60s, which I read as a kid. Yeah, but yeah, I think there's a lot of copying, and again, nothing wrong with copying if you want to be a copyist, but copying other people's drawings won't develop the art skills that I need to create my own original ones, because creating an artwork from scratch, from a blank sheet of paper with maybe a photo, but that's all. Oh, just a minute. I'll check my text. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, my wife's going out for the morning, so just saying goodbye. Yeah, because when we copy, there's no understanding of process. And again, that's why I haven't seen the million maker. Look, there's a million beginners in everything. There's a lot of people in the world. Um, um, and actually, I've had a lot because when I switched to ink, I had a lot of people start to give comments of my artworks, particularly my bushland scene, saying, "Oh, your work really reminds me of this manga artist." And I Google them because I don't know of any. And honestly, I'm so honored. Some of the company that people are saying my work reminds them of, brilliant, brilliant inking, like just brilliant. Um, yeah, but you're not going to learn that by copying that. You learn that by coming to understand the way they think in order to produce that. And of course, as I've experienced, my 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 drawings have developed as my understanding has developed. And I'm sure this is the case for everyone. So if your drawing hasn't changed, if you think your style isn't maturing, I'd say almost without a doubt it's because there's been no development of what's happening in the process. So perhaps all of those videos of mine where I don't do a drawing demo, but I'm explaining something about the understanding of the drawing process, they might be a helpful place to start if you want to draw in ink and trying to create fairly realistic captures of the subject, because that's where my thinking goes to. So, if you want to do highly abstracted colored drawings, then my videos probably aren't the way to go, because the way of understanding what we're trying to do and then the means we have to do it won't line up with what you're wanting. So it's also making good choices. But yeah, but my drawing style has certainly changed, and it's changed because my understanding has changed. And see, understanding takes time, and we do live in a very impatient world. Look, I use tips and hacks and shortcuts in my thumbnails, as everyone does, because you want people to watch the videos, but it's not, that's not really a thing. It's a handy way of saying, perhaps an efficient way to learn to draw better is to do this, is to have this framework for thinking about it. This may get you to where you want to go faster than what you're doing at the moment, if you don't feel that you're traveling very fast. Yeah. And it's interesting that with those 5 areas where I think my thinking has matured and developed, that I've outlined a few times already, that they've been sequential, in the sense of each one of those was a primary focus for a period, but equally there was always a little bit of all of them swirling round. But I really only had the capacity, I think, to focus primarily on one. And when I focused on that, when I was probably more more aware of this being really important, and there are ways I can improve on this. When I had improved then on that particular one, I guess I had space now in my head, and in terms of what I did on the paper and how I did it, for the next one to become more important, more significant. So, and I guess in a way, it's like, if I keep talking about learning the piano, honestly, you think I could play the piano. Never, I just paid for lessons for the kids to learn the piano. But, when you learn a musical instrument, you learn certain things and you get them under your belt, certain techniques. And there's obviously a progression from more simple to more complex. But it's when you thoroughly kind of assimilate what you've learned, now you have space in your head, and in the time that you spend practicing, to focus on something else. And so you get a higher level of keyboard pieces, whatever. And if you have a teacher, the teacher will hold you to a higher standard, as well as what was a good first lesson performance at whatever you do in a first lesson will not be good enough in the 20th lesson or the 100th lesson. You're expected to be improving in your ability to incorporate the new information with what you already know. And it's the same, with drawing. It's the same with drawing. We should be improving, but we can't have a focus on more than really one thing. A focus by definition is one thing. So we can't have a focus of more than one thing. And yes, in a sense, those 5 things, the way my focus has changed. And the one that currently is my focus really is the edges. That it's not just the silhouette edge of a tree canopy, but it's every edge. Every edge, we're trying to capture the effect of the edge. And sometimes a smooth straight line is a good way of doing that. A heavy, smooth, straight, even line. Sometimes we'll want more variability in the line. Sometimes we're going to want that line to be as fine as possible. And sometimes we won't even want to notice the line. Now, I did draw a line here where the shade hits the building, but look how light it is. And the sharpness of the sunlight is what we see now, because we really don't see a line. We see a plane where the value ends, and then a plane where there's no value, which in context we read as sunlight. I really like this drawing. Like from an artist's point of view, I really like this drawing. Yeah. And yet it's so simple. There's so few things to do with it. But I just love the simplicity of the line work. There's a mistake in it. I don't know if you can see the line that's not quite right. If anyone wants to have a guess what the mistake is, I'll tell you in a couple of minutes. But yeah, so it's not perfect, but that doesn't stop me really enjoying it, because there are some things, I think, some effects, particularly the windows. And it's interesting because this was such a simple building, besides getting the proportions right, and I'll be honest, this is actually my second take. I actually drew this and recorded it. And when I finished it, I saw something wrong with it that you wouldn't have noticed. Well, you would have, because you saw the photo, but the proportions of that front wall were, yes, the roof line is the mistake. Good on you. This line here. Yep, the angle's not. And the reason I made it was I positioned this corner and drew the line without stopping to visualize that line and to see if that was the best spot. This was the best spot according to the reference, but that was the right spot according to the reference, lining up with the detail on this wall. But clearly there are enough departures at the bottom of the shaded wall. A line is wrong at the bottom of the shaded wall. That could be the ground levels uneven, or it could be that I'm not holding this straight on too. So you need to be careful of the angles. Yeah, I don't know that I can see that, but I've been drawing way too many boxes lately, so I could see. Yeah. Well, it's good to do those exercises, but yeah. But I particularly liked, because it was a relatively simple shape, which does put more importance on accuracy of our shapes, because there's no detail to kind of distract the eye. But the windows and the sunlight coming through them, and I'm drawing this fairly small scale, was the challenge. And just to have a real lightness, but yet still to, because the supports for the individual window panes weren't very large, and they may even have been leaded, and so it was a fairly visually light effect in life. And so I didn't want to create a real heavy grid. And so again, this comes down to creating the effect rather than drawing the detail. And when we're creating the effect, we're not assuming that an outline is the way to go. Thanks, Villa. Yeah, but as you see, I didn't draw a heavy line down here, And on this side, we don't have a heavy line. We have a dark value that comes up alongside, which defines the edge for us, because that's one of the uses we can have for hatching. And I mean, it's not hard to get references of actual locations where there is foliage like this. And I often exaggerate that in my drawing to pop the building out more. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, and again, that's one of my most recent drawings. So I yeah, and thanks. Yeah, and with the light, light is such a valuable, capturing light effects is such a valuable way of getting impact in what we draw. And so, if I'm focused on this as my goal, then I've got heavy black lines everywhere. And, what I see are heavy black lines, and because of the patterning of them, I can work out. I mean, if you come in late, this is one of my first videos. And again, accuracy, but heavy black lines everywhere that do create a flatter effect than if I used more nuanced lines and marks. Look, I think this is long enough. Gosh, 2 hours, 20 minutes is certainly long enough. Time for me to go and lie down. We've had 3 days in the mid to highish 30s here, which is very unseasonal for autumn for us. So we've got some cooler days now. So I think I might go and go for a walk and enjoy the coolness in some of the bushland that's around me. So thanks everyone for joining. Please, if anyone watching has not hit the like button, please get me over 60. Please, someone hit the like button. I'm just going to keep jabbering until someone hits that like button and we go over 60, and then I'll put us all out of our misery. Thank you very much. And look, if you missed me drawing this video, which was sort of yesterday or the day before yesterday, but this I think is a really, really, really helpful. I mean, I got the comment from this that this is the most helpful drawing video they've ever watched, and it's a live session. So you need to go on my channel and find the live sessions, because it was a live drawing where I talked as I drew it, which means I drew it slower because at times I couldn't talk and draw at the same time. The video is probably 2 hours, but the actual drawing part's about 45 minutes. So if you want to, just sort of slide along to the drawing part and just get a coffee and just watch and hear me, because I mean, this was all about when we draw streetscape, dealing with all the clutter in the foreground. One of the challenges of streetscapes is that the architecture, which is often the main part of the subject, is often in the background, and it's layering these other things in a realistic way that is the important thing. It is vital. And so, yeah. Thanks, Brazen. Appreciate that. And please, look, any of you have friends who draw. If you haven't plugged my channel, please do that. And anyway, look, time for me to go and put my feet up. But I feel like I've been up since dawn, which I probably have been, late dawn. So thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for the likes. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for talking to each other. When I've been raving on too, I really love the fact that this format gives that a chance to happen. So anyway, I'll see you next time. Bye.